Hi everybody. So this is the second of the little sessions that we put up here on YouTube for the holiday period, as it were, for the period where we're on our break. So hopefully this will give you something to work on while we're away from the live sessions. We'll start in our usual way, just rubbing your hands together, tapping over your face. Then over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder. And your arm. And then the other side. And the upper part of your chest. Down to your belly. And your legs. And sit back and just use in particular this opening part of the session just as a way of reminding yourself of this overall feeling that we get from Tai Chi, the quietness, the stillness, and all the associated physical qualities, that ability to let go and yield to the pull of gravity and so on and so forth, that smoothness of movement. Just sitting back, feeling your weight drop into the chair, feeling your breathing. Place your hands on your belly for a few moments and just feel the rise and fall. Very gentle behind your hands, pushing your hands up as you breathe in. Just feeling them drop down a little bit as you breathe out. And then moving your hands up to just below your ribs in the solar plexus. You may feel a little bit stronger here, that same rise and fall. Move one hand down to the first position, and this is the hand that you want to try and move just before the top one. So you feel your in-breath seeming to fill your belly, then your solar plexus, and then reversing that with the out-breath. Okay, take your hands away. So don't try and reproduce that. As always, it's just a reminder of what we sometimes refer to in Tai Chi as bellows breathing, expanding in the belly and then in the solar plexus, drawing the air gently down into our lungs and giving space for our lungs to expand deeper down into the body. So now come into the sit-in. Use the back of the chair to support your lower back if you wish to. Don't let your back get tight or stiff, but try and have a little bit of weight in your feet. About a third of your weight ideally in your feet. Feeling your hips drop. Once again, that feeling of settling downwards into the chair, but also into this stronger feeling, almost like a support structure within your body. Rib cage hanging, shoulders dropping down. And then slowly turning your head. As always, the familiarity with the routines, and in particular with the opening parts of the class, help with this feeling of settling in mind and body, of remembering, of the smoothness of the movements, the qualities within our body of space, with our mind of a kind of settled, more focused, quieter quality. And the weight of your body in your hips and your feet not held tightly in your upper body. And then your shoulders, your elbows go a little behind your shoulders. So as you go back here, just where your arm meets your chest, you can begin to feel a little bit of extension and contraction. I won't say stretching. And then similarly behind the shoulder as you go forwards. And when we do both arms, that really spreads across our chest and upper back. And then you go forwards. Hands coming down, and here, hands slightly in front and then winding out and back. And again, if I do this from the side, you'll see hand here is slightly in front of my hip, and as I go out slightly behind hip and shoulder. So we get the same opening and closing, extension and contraction around about here and in the back. And again, we feel that a little bit more strongly with both arms. So whenever we want to move or rotate our arm, our wrist, our hand, we're going to be feeling the connection, if we pay attention, to what's happening in ribs, upper back. The same thing here, winding around. And back the other way. So there's a great deal happening in these opening movements, but we want to get a feeling of becoming hardwired into how we move. Rest your hands. And then the pelvis tilting forwards and backwards, your weight moving more into your legs. So your legs now very involved in moving your body, pushing you back, but also your hips being pulled back by the pull of gravity. The result is, as you come up, a nice smooth, open feeling of movement in the upper part of your body, rather than the habitual sort of tightening and straining that we tend to feel. And then turning just a little. And then in the other direction. And then swinging around. Remember, it's your hips, pelvis, lower back, waist. You're creating the movement that moves the shoulders and your head and ultimately your arms. In your spine, not held tightly in your back. A little bit of movement there. Go back the other way. Back to the center, settle down, raise your heel by rotating your hip and pulling your knee up, step out and back. And then on the other side. Obviously it can feel quite different from one leg to another. And then we're going to start slightly differently. Just go back to this movement. So you wind your hands back, you feel the opening across your chest. You roll them around, winding them forward. Remember, it's like you've got a pillar or a ball either side of you, just sliding your hands around. And this time, as you wind your hands around, move forwards. So we've got the combination of our weight moving with that opening and closing in the upper part of our body, alternating between front and back. See if you can just find a way of connecting up those movements. And this time, rather than winding the hands, just let them rest down and go into the more familiar fisherman castanet. And just recognize that some of what is moving your arms and your hands is that same opening and closing in chest and upper back, which builds on the fundamental energy of your weight moving. And as we go through the different movements, we will begin to look at different patterns in the upper body. There can be quite a lot of variation in those. More variations really than in our legs and hips, because fundamentally that is going to be forwards and backwards or rotating. Not that many options, but as we get into the different movements in the upper part of our body, we can find that the arm movements can direct our attention, draw our attention into these very subtle changes in the body. And then coming over And now pigeon spreads its wings. Excuse me. Pushing a wave or pushing the boat. So with this one, our elbows come out slightly. So again, we have that same opening in the chest, which adds to the power, feeling the strength as we press forwards. But now when we change to punch with both hands, the elbows don't go out so much. So we really focus on the rotation of the arm. And again, that same sort of response in chest and ribs and upper back. Do one more of these, and then we're going to go back to pigeon spreads its wings. We're going to link these three movements together. And so this is a way that we can begin to just be aware of, to focus on those small changes within the body, because each movement has the same pattern in hips and legs, but very subtle variations in back, chest, belly, and of course the arms. Doing one after the other like this can really help us to focus our attention in that way. One more round. Now open your hands, turn them out, wider out. So try and cultivate a sense of curiosity, a sense of observing how your body is making movements that hopefully are familiar enough to you that you're not having to think too hard about exactly what you're doing. I know sometimes we'll do a more complex exercise, but we're not doing that at the moment. This is familiar ground, hopefully, to most of you. And giving us that space for the observation. We're not trying to force our body to move in a particular way. So now, coming back, change into the vertical movements. Bring your back lengthening and contracting. Expanding your belly, lower back. With the feeling of kind of pushing your hands up. Pulling them down with the expansion and the contraction. Very similar feel really to the one that you might have felt when we did that little breathing exercise earlier. One more time. Changing now to the wild goose. And then parting the clouds. And then once again, we're going to put these three movements together so we can just focus on the changes, the smooth transition from one movement to another. As before, in our legs and our hips, it's basically the same movement, a gentle push down to push our arms up and out. Slight variation here because we tilt forwards just a little bit to let our hands go in front of our shoulders. And of course we have the names of the movements, rooting down, really feeling very strongly that lower part of the body sinking towards the ground. And then the wild goose with its image of the bird in flight, a bit more expansive, and it's a bit more expansive again as we go into parting the clouds, reaching up just a little bit more very gently. Do one more round like this in the movement. With each stage of this sequence, feels as though the movement within our body moves a little bit higher until it reaches its sort of culmination really in parting the clouds. And in the same way, moving into dragon plucks the stars from the sky, we feel the movement start in our foot and then in our hip, and then the expansion working upwards through one side of our body and contracting. Change sides. one more time. Change. Same thing, of course. We're alternating between the push up and the push out. Slight differences there. And then, as well as those feelings, we want to turn. So make sure that the turn doesn't dominate the other movements within your body. Turn carefully from your hips. Everything, all these little movements, we want to be working in harmony with each other. And one of the key things to allow that to happen is to work with our posture, to make sure we have the space within the body for these different pathways of movements to coexist alongside each other rather than straining against each other. So one of the things that we want to cultivate is a very strong focus of attention in the middle of our body, hips and waist, from there down into the ground, so that that becomes part of the constant background for the practice. Do one more round of this. One foot out, scooping the sea and looking at the sky. And now, grasping the tiger's ears. Switch sides. And change. Good. And sit back. Just rest and take a couple of slow, gentle breaths. And then going forwards and turning. And back. Forwards and turning again. Make sure that these two different planes of movement, the angling forwards in your back and the rotation in your body, don't work against each other. And that may mean quite often that we don't move very far at all. That's fine. Because now we're going to bring our arms into the movement, and what will happen is we have these the expansion and the push out. So the movement gradually builds like a wave through our body. Again, if you're finding that you're straining in your shoulders or your upper back, then make it a much smaller movement. Just do this. In fact, do this anyway, because that can be quite interesting, because suddenly you've got a smaller movement, and you may well become aware of other changes that were kind of hidden before. So play around with it, play around with the range of the movement, how far you're moving, where your attention is while you're moving. And then cow gazes at the moon. Let's start quite small. Just a little way. Feel what's happening in your lower back. Gradually, each time, like pushing somebody on the swing, the arms go just a little bit further, but never straining. One more time. As you come back now, turn your hands in as though they're holding the ball, in a vertical circle around. And then go back in the other direction. And then as though you put the ball down on the ground and your hands are on top of it, rolling the ball around. So horizontal circle. Feel the connection with your hips and your weight's going forwards now, and then across to the other foot, and then back to this hip, and across to this hip, turning in the center of your body, not straining in your arms. Not stiff or tight in your wrists or your fingers. So you may find, for instance, I'll exaggerate a little bit this time, there's a slight, if you were pushing the ball along, you see how the arms just rotate a little bit. Go back the other way. One more time in this direction. I'm going to change direction again, but this time it's going to be one hand going forwards as the other goes back to the center, and then forwards again, stirring the beads. Let's do one more on each side. Good. Now, one hand from this hip, the opposite hip to the hand going forwards, push out in this arm movement that's part of the movement, part in the wild horse's mane. And again, we feel that opening here. So sometimes we feel that as a distinctly muscular thing, but here it's more like this area is filling up like a balloon, pushing your arm out. Try on the other side. It's like water flowing in, expanding that side of your chest. This is actually a movement that, in sort of medical terms, if you like to think of it like that, is connected to the chest and lungs. And you can begin to appreciate why, hopefully. So then, coming back, hold the ball, come across, and push out. parting the wild horse's mane. One more time on each side. And rest. Good. Now once again, rubbing your hands together, preparing to stand, your face, your head and neck, down to one shoulder, and your arm, then on the other side. Upper part of your belly. Then glasses back on your legs. Now stand. So let's do the exercise swaying in the river, because when we go forwards and our arms are out slightly, we rock the weight forwards and then back. And once again, we get that opening and close. If I exaggerate, it's quite an interesting exercise to try this with. If I go forwards, see how my arms are back. They're far too far back. In fact, I wouldn't expect you to do this. But then front of my body draws in, and that brings the arms forward. I go back, you see I'm sort of hunched over, but then see how that brings my arms back. And that's what we want to be happening, but it's much smaller than that. It's very subtle. These are really movements that, for the most part, you wouldn't expect to see. You can sort of see them a little bit if you get a good view of the movement. But rather than movements that you feel, that's quite difficult. So sometimes exaggerating the movements, although it actually makes the movement incorrect, but sometimes by exaggerating them, we do actually get a sense of what's happening within the body, and we can then make those movements smaller. Now, as your weight comes forwards this time, don't go forwards too far, but let your hips drop back to counterbalance that movement and change into rooting down. A slightly wider view. Change to the wild goose. and parting the clouds. And as we did in the chair, linking these movements up, going to rooting down. Probably feel more what's going on in your legs and hips than when you were seated. It's a more obvious movement. It's very subtle in the chair, of course. But don't feel that, but also feel again variance in the upper part of your body as you go from one movement to another, as you change from one image, one idea, one experience of the movement to another. One more time. Put one foot forwards. Keep the width of your step as always. Use your legs to move your upper body. But also use the image of moving through water so that you do feel a response in the upper part of your body. And then on the other side. Good. And then we'll use this little movement as well. So again, just to remind you, it's like you've got a pillar either side of you, and you're just winding your hands around. And have one foot forwards. Start on your back foot and just have your hand in this back position, slightly behind your hips. Go forwards and winding around. Feel the movement down the front and the back of your body. And then again, sink back and change to fisherman caster net. Good. And then on the other side, so first of all, the hands winding around the pillar. And then your hands rotate round, fisherman castanet. One more time. And good. Go back to your chairs. So there's quite a lot of detail in some ways in that, of course. Lots of things about internal movements. But remember the starting point, once again, is very simple. So the foundation for all of these things is actually that stillness, that quietness, that adjustment of the posture, however you care to think about it. That idea of the mountain and the strength and stillness and so on, very much the sort of root in a way of all the other developments. So we're going to Embrace Tiger, return to the mountain. Thank you for watching. We'll be back with our usual sort of online program from the 21st of September, so not far away now. And hopefully we'll be able to build up some face-to-face sessions for those of you able to get to them. But I think the online program will be continuing for a fair while yet. So hopefully see you soon anyway. But now, Embrace Tiger, return to mountain. One more time. And rest. Lovely. Thank you again for watching. See you soon.